Hello, welcome. My name is Robert Denton. I was for 30, almost 35 years, what's known as a healer. Spiritual healer, hands-on healer, faith healer, call it what you will. I was never happy with any of those labels. First of all, I wasn't particularly spiritual. We are all spiritual beings, but I wasn't particularly spiritual. And secondly, I didn't believe that I was the healer. Now, I've been healing for, as I said, more than 30 years, almost 35 years. And I'd seen many people, and some of them were not successful. And those that were not successful, or those healings that were not successful, were the ones that I really wanted to understand why. Because the ones that were successful were so quick, so fast, so amazing. My first video I mentioned the case of helping a aging racing car driver. He simply had too much money and could afford to pay so that he could race his cars. They weren't F1, but they were, at least I don't think they were F1. Anyway, after being completely crippled for 2 years and no surgeon willing to go anywhere near him, and certainly not to touch him with a scalpel or anything else, I was taken to his home in Madrid, and 10 minutes later he was walking. Now, I've seen some amazing things, and I learned from that experience that I wasn't the healer. I just had the capability to do something that enabled him to heal himself. Now, that may seem extraordinary, and it is, but the human body is extraordinary in its power to heal itself. It's doing it all the time, and it's when we get in its way, like driving a racing car into a bridge at 200 miles an hour, that it throws its hands up in the air and say, that's it, I'm done, I'm finished. You want to mess up your life, that's your problem, and until you get it sorted out, or get yourself and your thinking sorted out, you're going to stay exactly as you are in excruciating pain. Okay, right, that may sound a bit tough, but that's essentially what happened. Now, I saw a doctor who was given 2 weeks to live. He had cancer of the stomach, one of the worst forms of cancer. He'd had several operations, and finally the hospital said, that's it, we cannot do any more. There's nothing else. You go and sort out your life. You have 2 weeks to live. And he knew it. When I saw him, he was incredibly calm, composed, cool. And he was Spanish. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. He didn't speak a word of English. Well, he may have had a few words, but it was all done through an interpreter. Now, I did what I usually do, which was completely follow my intuition. The amazing thing is that that doctor was absolutely against healers all his life. Completely and utterly against them all his life, and he denounced any that he came across. Some went to prison, some were heavily fined, some went to prison, and according to the laws of that country. Yet here he was facing death, and he was asking for the help of a healer. 2 weeks later, he wasn't at his funeral, he was in his office. He was in his surgery. He was seeing his patients, and he had no sign of cancer. Now that's pretty extraordinary. I saw a woman who had precisely the same cancer of the stomach. And she was in a spiral, a tornado of fear and panic, not for herself, for her son. Her father, or her husband, the son's father, had died of cancer only 6 months earlier. And there was no other family. There was no one to look after her son. And she was in sheer panic. I did everything I could do, that I knew to do, well, it was all intuitive. For a short period, her pain went and then it returned. On analysis, the story goes on, and eventually she died in hospital in extreme agony despite the most powerful painkillers. And I wonder what was the difference between these two patients with the same condition. One was a doctor and as cool as a cucumber, and he was ready to face death. The other was a mother, desperate, in panic. And the panic was the most atrocious stress I'd ever seen. I've been through burnout. I know what burnout is. How she didn't burn out with that level of stress. Only a mother knows. A mother protecting her young. So what's the difference? Why did it work for a doctor who was as cool as a cucumber and ready to face death, and a mother who was in complete panic? Well, there is a medical reason, and that is that stress does terrible things to us. It does chronic things to our body and our mind. It blocks our immune system. It blocks our self-protection system. Or we have many of them. And I went through burnout and wrote a book called High Performance After Burnout, Fix the Stress Before the Damage is Done. And believe me, in my case, I lost my businesses and lost my personal fortune, my income, everything. Well, not everything, but in this case, which I mention in my book, Will a Real Healer Please Stand Out? I talk about this case, and I put it down to that woman could have possibly been alive for many more years had she not been in such panic, stress, pouring cortisol, the stress hormone cortisol, into her body and brain, blocking her innate healing intelligence, her innate healer, which one of the problems with cancer is, or even with the racing car driver, was a racing car driver. He lay there in an enormous chair in agony for 2 years, agonizing over his folly. The doctor, he was ready. He'd seen death so many times. He was ready to face it, and he was completely calm. And this was something I noted in many of my patients where their healing was successful. Their calmness, their acceptance, not of death, but their acceptance of themselves and whatever they believed in. It's too complex to call just fear of death. To have that level of calmness that enabled them to heal themselves conforms completely to medical science and avoiding stress. And when it gets to enormous stress, then we do terrible things to ourselves. And we can do those same things by stressing our body by too much alcohol, stressing our body with too much smoking, stressing our body with junk food full of artificial chemicals and flavor products, quite unnatural and highly processed. And when we're on a diet of too much alcohol, too much smoking, and too much junk food, there's a price to pay. My book, Will a Real Healer Please Stand Up, is really about healing ourselves. And we do that by caring for ourselves. As far as myself as a healer, I still don't fully understand it. I was doing something, I accept I was doing something that enabled those people to heal themselves who were doing all the right things to help their inner healer to do its job. Those who didn't heal, I can only guess that their level of stress was just too great for their inner healer to do what it should have been doing. Now you might ask the question, well, why, if this inner healer is so good, why do we get so ill? Why do people have cancer or other problems? The answer to that is the same as I mentioned with too much alcohol, too much junk food, is what we do to ourselves, what we believe, our beliefs and values, the things that we use to stress our lives. I went through enormous burnout, catastrophic burnout, because of my beliefs and values in the way I was managing my companies and growing my companies. It was just not sustainable. I made it sustainable by my sheer willpower, and the price I paid for getting that wrong was burnout. I don't want to state the obvious because it seems rather crude, but there are some people one cannot help. I don't like to consider myself as a helper, more of somebody who supports, who guides. And I do have some, now, many years later, I do have some clues as to what I was doing that enabled these people to activate their innate healer. They are a little bit complex. They are medical. They are not spiritual. They are medical or neuroscience. And although they become very close to a level of spirituality, which I cannot deny. So my book, Will a Real Healer Please Stand Up, is available on Amazon.com. And for those living in Switzerland who wish to buy a copy, they cannot buy it from Amazon because of the Swiss government regulations. But the Swiss publisher, First House Press, has opened a email address, firsthousepress@gmail.com. Now, the address is there, plus the YouTube address of my previous video. So until the next, take care, and if you wish to be advised of the next video where I'll talk further about what I believe or the skill or the gift I had that helped people to actually reactivate their innate healer, will be in the next video. So if you want to know about that as soon as it comes out, then register and you'll be notified automatically. So for the time being, this is the end of this video. This is Robert Denton signing off.